Remember from the last module that I indicated that global variables are not really the best way to proceed when using functions. This module, we learn a better solution. That solution is called function parameters. So let's first define what a function parameter actually is. A function parameter is a value that can be passed into a function to modify the behavior of that function. Do we know of any examples of this so far? Well, think about printf. We've called printf several times in the past. Sometimes we've called printf and say, can you please print out the value of this integer? And sometimes we call printf and we say, can you please display the contents of this string? And the results that we see on the screen, in other words, what printf actually does, depends on what we pass it. If we pass it an integer, we get a number. If we pass it a string, then we get the text in that string. In other words, we are passing some value in to the function called printf that modifies the behavior of printf. Printf actually does different things depending on what we give it. Now, admittedly, all those things are quite similar, but they're actually a little bit different. A very simple example of a function that we may want to create might be a function that simply adds two numbers together. It might add number x and number y and do something with the total. Perhaps it would print out the total. Now, the total that it printed would depend on the two numbers that got passed in. If I passed in 100 and 200, I would get a completely different result to if I passed in 1 and 2. So let's learn more about that. A function parameter can be thought of as a local variable that has been passed in from the calling function. A local variable, you might recall, is a variable that is only available inside the curly brackets of any given function. In other words, no other function has access to that particular variable. So what I'm saying here is that function parameters are also local variables. They're also only accessible inside a given function. Once a value has been passed in to a function using a function parameter, then that value is then only accessible from inside the function where it was received. No other function can access that particular parameter. Now, we've used several functions so far, like printf and scanf and fgetS and so forth. We've used such functions that involve parameters, but we've never actually created a function that involves parameters. We have in fact created a function or two, including main, but none of them have involved parameters. So we're going to learn now how to add parameters to the functions that we have created. This is what it would look like. Now, remember old strlen. Strlen is called like this. We create ourselves a string of any particular length, and then we pass that string, called name, say, into the function called strlen, and strlen gives us back a particular number which represents the length of that string. Now, obviously, somewhere in between those two lines we actually have to assign some value into name. We have to initialize name. But assuming we've done that, then the strlen would work, and if we passed in a short string, we would get a small integer back for length, and if we passed in a great big name string, we would get a large number back in length. Again, strlen, the value that strlen gives us back, or in other words, the behavior of strlen does indeed depend on the parameter that we pass it. So what does strlen look like if you were to write it as a function? Well, it would look like the following. You would have the name strlen, then you would have some round brackets. Now notice those are exactly the same round brackets as we use when we create a function called main, except this time we've got something in the round bracket. We'll talk more about that in a second because that is the actual function parameter. And then after that, it's just the function as per normal. The statements that you can see there would of course be the processing that the function actually does. The guts of the statement of the function, if you like. So anyway, back to the inside the parentheses, inside the round brackets there, you can see char space str and then square brackets. That looks suspiciously like a variable declaration. In fact, it is a variable declaration. We are creating a new variable there called str. It is a local variable that can only be used inside this function. But here's the clever part. When strlen runs, the str local variable that you can see inside the parentheses there is automatically initialized to contain whatever was contained inside name. Now name you get from above, where we're actually calling stren, we're passing it the value of name. That name and the str become copies of each other. The value in name is copied into the value in str as soon as the function is called. So if you like, a function parameter is a local variable that gets initialized to some value outside the function automatically. In this case, str is a function parameter that gets initialized to the value name, and name comes from outside the function. And that happens automatically every time you call stren. So let's now go and have a look at an example very similar to this. This is stren.c. In here I've written myself a function called strlength. I've called it strlength and not stren because I actually don't want to get confused between this function and the standard C library function called stren, so I've changed the name slightly. Now this strlength does not use function parameters. In fact, it uses a global variable. In fact, it uses two global variables. It uses one to determine the string that it's actually going to be measuring, and it uses a second variable called length to determine the actual length of the string. It fills in the length of the string, which is then used by main. Let's see how it works. We'll just compile it. Run it. Please enter your first name, Mark, and the length of Mark is 4, as expected. So the program works, but what I'd like to do now is actually rewrite the program so that it does not use global variables. It does not use either of these two global variables. That's going to be tricky to do because we still need to learn about function return values, and that's not till the next module, but we can actually get rid of one of these global variables, and one is better than none, so let's try and do that. I'm going to make this variable here, the string variable, not a global. I'm going to make it a local variable down inside the main program, so I'm going to put it in here. So now it is not a global variable, as you can see, which is a good step in the right direction. However, the program will now not compile because up here, strlength does not know anything about this particular variable here, because string is now local to main, and so strlength, the function, does not have access to it. Our solution, of course, is to use a function parameter. I'm going to bring into strlength as a parameter. So I've now declared that strlength will be using this one parameter. So you can think of the main function passing, if you like, a ball to the function called strlength. Now strl such a way that it will actually receive that ball, receive that parameter. So I'm now going to create a little parameter definition here, which will be char str bracket bracket. Notice that I do not have to call it string. Just because this is called string does not mean that this has to be called string. In fact, I can call this anything I like. So I will call it str. Now this then is the name of the variable that I'm going to be counting, so this has to be renamed to be str because it will be referring to